The cold autumn wind swept through the dusty streets of Redemption Creek, carrying whispers of the auction that would forever change the lives of two strangers. Hannah O'Sullivan clutched her tattered shawl tighter around her trembling shoulders, fighting back tears as the auctioneer's gavel struck the wooden block, signaling the beginning of what felt like the end of her life. Redemption Creek, Montana Territory, 1876. The mining town had sprung up like a weed during the Silver Rush 5 years prior, attracting men of fortune and men of misfortune alike. Hannah had arrived just 3 days ago, escorted by a U.S. Marshal who'd found her half-starved in a Colorado stagecoach station. Her uncle, her last living relative, had died on the journey west, leaving her penniless and alone. The town's leadership, unsure what to do with a destitute young woman, had decided to auction off her labor contract to recoup the costs of her arrival and care. "What we have here, gentlemen, is a fine specimen of womanhood," bellowed Silas Mercer, the auctioneer whose bulbous nose glowed red from years of whiskey. 20 years old, healthy, and educated too. Can read and write, they say. Starting bid is $10 for a 1-year labor contract. Hannah kept her eyes fixed on the dirt beneath her feet. She knew what kind of labor most of these men had in mind. The mining town had 6 saloons and only 1 church, which told her everything she needed to know about its moral character. $10, called a voice from the crowd. 15. Shouted another. Hannah dared to glance up. Among the sea of weathered faces, one man stood out, a bear of a figure with a wild gray beard and eyes that reminded her of a hungry wolf. Jasper Wilkes, owner of the Red Garter Saloon, notorious for how he treated his serving girls. $25, Wilkes called, his voice gravelly from years of cheap cigars. A murmur rippled through the crowd. It was a high price, but everyone knew Wilkes would make it back tenfold. 25 going once. Mercer raised his gavel, $50. The crowd parted, revealing a tall figure standing at the back. Hannah squinted against the morning sun. The man wore a worn leather duster, a Stetson pulled low over his eyes. Unlike the miners and townsmen, his face was clean-shaven, his posture straight as a rifle barrel. "Well, well," Mercer grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. $50 from Mr. Foster Collins. Our own cattle baron decides to join the bidding." Wilkes turned, his face darkening. $60. The tall stranger stepped forward, and Hannah saw his face clearly for the first time. He couldn't have been more than 30, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. $100, he said, his voice calm but carrying across the suddenly silent crowd. Wilkes spat on the ground. "You planning to start a harem out at that ranch of yours, Collins?" Foster Collins ignored him, his eyes meeting Hannah's for the briefest moment. She saw something there, not the hunger or cruelty she'd seen in other men's eyes, but something she couldn't quite name. 100 going once. Mercer paused, glancing at Wilkes. 125, Wilkes growled. $200, Collins countered immediately. Wilkes cursed under his breath. Even for a saloon girl who might bring in good business, that was more than he could justify. 200 going once, going twice. Mercer seemed almost disappointed. "Sold to Mr. Foster Collins for $200. The crowd began to disperse, some men grumbling, others laughing and slapping Wilkes on the back for his defeat. Hannah remained frozen on the auction block, her heart hammering in her chest. She'd been sold legally bound to a stranger for the next year of her life. Collins approached the platform, reaching into his vest to withdraw a leather wallet. He counted out the bills and handed them to Mercer, who passed him a folded document in return. Only then did Collins turn his attention to Hannah. "Miss O'Sullivan," he said with a slight nod. "I'm Foster Collins. My ranch is about 10 miles outside town. I have a wagon waiting." Hannah found her voice at last. What will be expected of me, Mr. Collins?" Something flickered across his face, perhaps surprise, perhaps something else. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, is returning to St. Louis to care for her ailing sister. I need someone to cook, clean, and help manage the household affairs. Nothing more." Hannah studied his face, looking for any sign of deception. Men had lied to her before, but there was a directness in his gaze that made her want to believe him. "I'll get my things," she said softly. "You have belongings?" He seemed genuinely surprised. "Just one small bag." "The marshal who brought me here was kind enough to let me keep my uncle's satchel." Collins nodded. "I'll wait by the general store. Take your time." As Hannah retrieved her meager possessions from the sheriff's office, her mind raced. Was she jumping from the frying pan into the fire? She knew nothing about this man, except that he owned a cattle ranch and had $200 to spend on a housekeeper, an exorbitant sum by any measure. But what choice did she have? At least he hadn't looked at her the way Wilkes had, like she was a piece of meat to be consumed. Foster Collins waited by a wagon loaded with supplies. He offered his hand to help her up, then climbed beside her and took the reins. They left Redemption Creek in silence, the buildings growing smaller behind them as the wagon rolled into the vast Montana landscape. After nearly an hour of silence, Hannah gathered her courage. "May I ask why you paid so much for a housekeeper, I mean?" Collins kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "I know what happens to women in Wilkes' establishment. No one deserves that fate. So it was charity." She asked, uncertain whether to feel grateful or offended. "Call it what you will." He glanced at her. "I need a housekeeper and you need a safe place. The arrangement benefits us both." Hannah nodded slowly. "I'm a hard worker, Mr. Collins. I won't disappoint you." "I believe you." For the first time, his stern expression softened slightly. "And it's just Foster. Mr. Collins was my father." The Collins Ranch came into view as they crested a hill, a sprawling property nestled in a verdant valley. A large main house stood proudly among several outbuildings, corrals, and a bunkhouse. Cattle dotted the distant pastures, and smoke rose from the chimney of the main house. "Welcome to the lazy sea," Foster said. As they approached, a man emerged from the barn, tall and lanky, with a shock of red hair beneath his hat. "That's Henry, my foreman," Foster explained. "I employ 8 ranch hands full-time, more during roundup season. They stay in the bunkhouse most nights, but Mrs. Abernathy and now you will prepare their meals." Hannah nodded, taking it all in. The ranch was larger and more prosperous than she'd imagined. Foster pulled the wagon to a stop and Henry approached. "Boss, everything go all right in town?" His eyes shifted curiously to Hannah. "Fine, Henry. This is Miss O'Sullivan. She'll be taking over for Mrs. Abernathy." Henry tipped his hat. "Madam." "Mrs. Abernathy left yesterday," Foster continued, helping Hannah down from the wagon. "I'll show you to your quarters and explain your duties." The main house was surprisingly elegant for a bachelor rancher's home. Solid furniture, polished floors, and actual paintings on the walls spoke of prosperity and taste. Foster led her to a small but comfortable bedroom at the back of the house. "This will be your room. Mrs. Abernathy left some clothing that might fit you until you can order your own." He gestured to a wardrobe in the corner. "The kitchen is fully stocked. Breakfast for the hands at sunrise, dinner at sundown. I take lunch in my study most days." Hannah set her satchel on the bed. "And your preferences, Mr. Foster, for meals and such?" "I'm not particular, just hearty, honest food." He hesitated at the door. "I'll leave you to settle in. Supper in 2 hours if you're up to it. If not, there's cold ham in the pantry." After he left, Hannah sat on the edge of the bed, emotions overwhelming her. Just days ago, she'd been certain her life was over, that she would end up in some saloon backroom or worse. Now she had a private bedroom, a respectable position, and an employer who so far seemed to be a decent man. She allowed herself a moment of tears, not of despair this time, but of cautious relief. The next few days established a routine. Hannah rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for the ranch hands' hearty fare of flapjacks, bacon, eggs, and strong coffee. The men were respectful if somewhat awkward around her, clearly trying to mind their manners in the presence of a lady. Foster took his meals separately, sometimes in his study, sometimes at the dining table after the hands had eaten. He rarely spoke beyond necessities, but Hannah often caught him watching her with an unreadable expression. On her 4th evening, as Hannah was clearing Foster's dinner dishes, he surprised her by speaking. "You're a good cook, Miss O'Sullivan." "Thank you," she paused. "My mother taught me." "Before she died, you've had a difficult road." It wasn't a question, but Hannah answered anyway. My parents died of influenza when I was 16. I lived with my aunt and uncle in Boston until my aunt passed last year. Uncle Thomas decided we should start fresh in Montana, but she trailed off. But he never made it, Foster finished softly. Hannah nodded, turning away to hide the tears that threatened. His heart gave out on the journey. The marshal found me at the stagecoach station. I had no money for a return ticket, no family to telegraph. Foster was silent for a long moment. I lost my parents young as well, father to a cattle rustler's bullet, mother to consumption a year later. I was 19, suddenly responsible for the ranch and my younger brother. Hannah looked at him with new understanding. I'm sorry, is your brother. Samuel joined the army after our mother died. Last I heard, he was stationed at Fort Laramie. Foster's expression tightened. We don't correspond much these days. The shared confidences shifted something between them. In the days that followed, Foster began taking all his meals at the table, sometimes lingering afterward to talk. Hannah learned that he'd built the Lazy C from a struggling outfit into one of the most prosperous ranches in the territory. He'd never married, dedicated instead to his land and cattle. In turn, Hannah shared stories of her life in Boston, her education at a ladies' seminary, her love of books. Foster seemed genuinely interested, asking thoughtful questions about her opinions and ideas rather than just her history. 2 weeks after her arrival, Foster entered the kitchen as Hannah was preparing lunch. I'm riding into town for supplies. Is there anything you need? Hannah wiped her hands on her apron. Some fabric would be nice if it's not too much trouble, and perhaps some writing paper, Foster nodded. Make a list. I'll be leaving in an hour. When he returned that evening, he carried not only the fabric she'd requested, but also a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. For you, he said, almost shyly. I saw it in the mercantile and thought you might enjoy it. Inside was a book, a collection of poetry by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Hannah ran her fingers over the embossed cover. This is very thoughtful, thank you. Foster shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Abernathy mentioned the library needs organizing. Perhaps you could take that on when you have time. There are more books there you might enjoy. The library became Hannah's sanctuary. During quiet afternoons, she cataloged Foster's impressive collection, discovering volumes of history, adventure, and poetry. Sometimes Foster would join her, and they would discuss what they were reading, debates that often stretched late into the evening. As autumn deepened, Hannah found herself watching for Foster's return whenever he rode out to check the herds. She told herself it was merely the natural concern of a housekeeper for her employer, but in her heart she knew it was more. One evening in late October, a fierce storm blew in from the mountains. Wind howled around the eaves of the house, and rain lashed against the windows. Foster and 2 of the hands had ridden out that morning to check on a herd in the north pasture and hadn't returned. Hannah paced the parlor, jumping at every sound. When the door finally burst open near midnight, Foster stumbled in, drenched and shivering. Foster. She rushed to help him remove his sodden coat. You're freezing. Lost track of time, he muttered through chattering teeth. Storm came on faster than expected. Hannah built up the fire while Foster changed into dry clothes. When he returned to the parlor, she handed him a mug of hot coffee liberally laced with whiskey. The men, she asked as he sank into his armchair, made it to the line shack. They'll stay there tonight. He took a long swallow of the coffee. You didn't need to wait up. I was worried, she admitted softly. Their eyes met over the rim of his mug. Something sparked between them, an unspoken current that had been building for weeks. Foster broke the gaze first. You should get some rest, Hannah. It was the first time he'd used her given name. The sound of it in his deep voice made her heart flutter. Good night, Foster, she whispered, retreating to her room where sleep remained elusive long into the night. The next morning, Foster was already gone when Hannah rose to prepare breakfast. Henry informed her that the boss had ridden out at dawn to check on the men and the herd. He returned mid-afternoon, mud-splattered but less tense. Hannah met him on the porch with a cup of fresh coffee. Thank you. His fingers brushed hers as he took the cup, sending a ripple of warmth up her arm. The herd weathered the storm well. No losses. I'm glad. She hesitated. Foster, about last night, I've been meaning to ask, he interrupted, clearly uncomfortable, if you might be willing to join me for dinner in town tomorrow evening. There's a new restaurant at the hotel. Mrs. Abernathy mentioned the food is quite good. The abrupt change of subject caught Hannah off guard. Dinner in town, only if you'd like to, he stared into his coffee cup. Consider it a thank you for your excellent work these past weeks. Hannah knew it was more than that, or at least she hoped it was. I would like that very much. The next day, Hannah fretted over her appearance. Mrs. Abernathy's clothes, while serviceable for household duties, weren't suited for dining out. She finally settled on her one good dress from Boston, slightly outdated but well made. When Foster saw her descend the stairs, he stared so long that Hannah began to worry something was amiss. Is something wrong? No, he said quickly. You look very nice. The ride to town was filled with an anticipatory tension. Foster pointed out landmarks along the way, telling stories of the early days when he'd first claimed the land. Hannah found herself laughing at his dry humor, a side of him she'd only glimpsed before. Redemption Creek had changed in the month since Hannah had last seen it. The town was preparing for winter, stacking firewood and hanging extra lanterns to ward off the early darkness. Several people greeted Foster with respect as he helped Hannah down from the wagon. Mr. Collins, good to see you in town, called a portly man in an expensive suit. And who might this lovely lady be? Judge Parker, may I present Miss Hannah O'Sullivan? Miss O'Sullivan, Judge Everett Parker. The judge's eyebrows rose slightly. O'Sullivan, the young lady from the auction last month. Hannah felt heat rise to her face, but Foster's hand settled reassuringly at the small of her back. Miss O'Sullivan is my housekeeper and a valued member of my household, he said firmly. Judge Parker's expression shifted to one of approval. Well, it's a pleasure to meet you properly, Miss O'Sullivan. Mr. Collins is a fine man. You're fortunate to have found employment with him. I believe we're both fortunate, Hannah replied, drawing a surprised glance from Foster. The hotel restaurant was indeed a step above the usual fare in Redemption Creek. White tablecloths, actual glassware, and a menu that offered more than just steak and potatoes. Foster ordered a bottle of wine, and they settled into conversation that flowed as easily as it did during their evenings in the library. I never expected to find someone like you in Montana, Foster admitted after their meal was cleared away. Someone like me, someone I can talk to. Someone who understands. He trailed off, seeming to search for words. Most people see only the rancher, the businessman. You see more. Hannah's heart quickened. And what do I see, Foster? A man who doesn't quite know what to do with the feelings you've stirred in him. The raw honesty in his voice took her breath away. Before she could respond, a commotion erupted at the front of the restaurant. A woman's frightened cry cut through the murmur of conversation. Foster was on his feet immediately, Hannah close behind him. Near the entrance, Jasper Wilkes had a firm grip on a young woman's arm, his face flushed with anger and alcohol. You work for me, girl, he was saying. You don't get to decide when you quit. Please, Mr. Wilkes, the woman pleaded. I'm sick, I need rest. You'll rest when I say so. Wilkes raised his hand and the woman flinched. Foster moved with surprising speed for such a tall man. That's enough, Wilkes. Wilkes turned, his bloodshot eyes narrowing when he recognized Foster. This ain't your business, Collins. This girl works for me. Not anymore, she doesn't. Foster's voice was calm but carried an unmistakable threat. Take your hand off her now. For a tense moment, it seemed Wilkes might refuse. Then, with a muttered curse, he released the woman, who stumbled back. You're making enemies, Collins, Wilkes snarled. First you outbid me for that one, he jerked his chin toward Hannah. Now you're interfering with my business again. Go home and sober up, Jasper, Foster advised. Before you do something you'll regret. Wilkes spat on the floor, then stormed out, nearly colliding with a waiter in his haste. The young woman was trembling. Up close, Hannah could see she was little more than a girl, perhaps 18, with dark circles under her eyes and a pallor that spoke of illness. Thank you, sir, she whispered to Foster. You have somewhere to go? Hannah asked gently. The girl shook her head. I was staying in a room above the saloon. Foster and Hannah exchanged a glance. We have space at the ranch, Foster said, at least until you're well enough to decide what's next. The journey back to the ranch was subdued. The girl, who introduced herself as Eliza, fell asleep almost immediately in the back of the wagon, wrapped in Foster's coat. "That was a kind thing you did," Hannah said softly. Foster kept his eyes on the road. "I couldn't stand by and watch, just like you couldn't at the auction." Hannah studied his profile in the moonlight. "Why did you really bid for me that day, Foster?" He was silent for so long that Hannah thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "When I saw you standing there, trying so hard to be brave, something just broke open inside me. I couldn't bear the thought of someone like you falling into Wilk's hands." "And now," she pressed. "What do you feel now?" Foster pulled the wagon to a stop, turning to face her fully. "Now I wonder how I managed all those years alone, how empty the house was before your laughter filled it. How much I've come to." He hesitated, then forged ahead. "How much I've come to care for you, Hannah, far more than is appropriate given our arrangement." Hannah's heart soared. Perhaps the arrangement needs to change. In the silver moonlight, she saw hope dawn in his eyes. Before he could respond, Eliza stirred in the back of the wagon, reminding them they weren't alone. "We should get her inside," Foster said, but his eyes held a promise of continued conversation. The next weeks brought changes to the lazy sea. Eliza, recovering from exhaustion and a lingering cough, gradually took on some of the lighter household duties, giving Hannah more time to assist Foster with the ranch accounts. Their evenings were spent in the library or by the fire, their conversations growing increasingly personal. Eliza watched their developing relationship with knowing eyes. "He loves you," she told Hannah one afternoon as they prepared dinner. "Anyone can see it." Hannah blushed. "We've known each other barely 2 months." "Some things don't need time," Eliza said with the wisdom of someone who had seen much of life despite her youth. "They just need the right people." As November drew to a close, Foster announced plans for a proper Thanksgiving celebration. "We'll invite the Hands and their families," he said. "And Judge Parker and his wife, perhaps a few others from town." The preparations gave the household a festive air. Hannah and Eliza spent days baking pies, preparing preserves, and planning the meal. Foster ordered extra supplies from town, including yards of festive bunting to decorate the dining room. The night before Thanksgiving, after Eliza had retired, Foster asked Hannah to join him in the library. A small fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room. "I have something for you," he said, handing her a small envelope. Inside, Hannah found a document, her labor contract, marked fulfilled in Foster's bold handwriting. "I don't understand," she said, confusion and a hint of fear clouding her joy. "My year isn't up for 10 more months." "I can't in good conscience keep you bound by that contract," Foster explained. "Not when my feelings for you have changed so dramatically. It wouldn't be right." Hannah stared at the paper. "So, you're releasing me from service?" "I'm releasing you from obligation," he corrected gently. "What you do next is entirely your choice. If you wish to leave, I've set aside wages for your time here, enough for you to travel wherever you'd like to go. And if I wish to stay," her voice trembled slightly. Foster took a deep breath. "Then I would ask you to stay not as my housekeeper, but as my wife." The contract fluttered from Hannah's fingers as she looked up at him in astonishment. "Your wife, I love you, Hannah O'Sullivan." Foster's voice was steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "I think I began falling in love with you the moment I saw you on that auction block, trying so hard to be brave. I know it's sudden." "Yes," she interrupted. "Yes, it's sudden." Foster looked confused. Hannah laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Yes, I'll marry you, Foster Collins." The relief and happiness that transformed his face made him look years younger. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, gathering her into his arms. Their first kiss was tentative, a gentle question and answer. The second was a promise, sealed with all the certainty of 2 hearts finding their home in each other. Thanksgiving Day dawned clear and cold. The ranch hands and their families arrived throughout the morning, bringing side dishes and good cheer. Judge Parker and his wife came at noon, the judge beaming when Foster and Hannah announced their engagement. I suspected as much when I saw you two in town, he said, clapping Foster on the shoulder. Couldn't be happier for you both. The celebration stretched well into the evening, with music and dancing in the cleared space of the main room. Hannah found herself swept from partner to partner, but her eyes always returned to Foster, who watched her with undisguised adoration. As the party wound down and guests began to depart, Jasper Wilkes appeared at the edge of the property, clearly intoxicated and supported by two equally drunk companions. "Collins," he bellowed, "come out here, you thieving bastard." Foster stepped onto the porch, Hannah and several of the ranch hands behind him. "Go home, Wilkes, you're drunk. You stole what was mine," Wilkes slurred, gesturing wildly. "First the O'Sullivan woman, then Eliza. You think you're better than the rest of us." "I didn't steal anyone," Foster replied calmly. "These women make their own choices." Wilkes fumbled at his waistband, drawing a pistol. Several women gasped, and the ranch hands tensed. "No one says no to Jasper Wilkes," he growled, raising the gun with an unsteady hand. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Henry lunged forward, knocking Foster aside just as Wilkes fired. The bullet splintered the porch post where Foster had been standing. Before Wilkes could fire again, Judge Parker's driver, a former lawman, tackled him from behind, wrestling him to the ground. The two men who had accompanied Wilkes melted away into the darkness, unwilling to involve themselves further. Within minutes, Wilkes was disarmed and restrained. "I'll take him to the jail in town," Judge Parker said grimly. "Attempted murder is a serious charge, Jasper. You'll face a circuit judge when one comes through." As Wilkes was led away, cursing and threatening, Hannah clung to Foster, her heart still racing from the close call. "Are you hurt?" "Not a scratch," he assured her, though his face was pale. Thanks to Henry's quick thinking. That night, after the excitement had died down and the house was quiet once more, Foster and Hannah sat together on the porch swing, wrapped in a blanket against the cold. "I want to marry you as soon as possible," Foster said, his arm tight around her shoulders. Today was a reminder that life is unpredictable. Hannah rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I don't need a fancy wedding, just you and perhaps a few friends." 2 weeks, Foster decided. "That will give us time to prepare properly, but not so long that I'll go mad with waiting," Hannah laughed softly. 2 weeks it is." The wedding preparations became the focus of the household. Eliza, now fully recovered, threw herself into helping Hannah sew a wedding dress from fine fabric Foster ordered from Helena. The ranch hands built an arbor for the ceremony, and Mrs. Parker from town offered to play the piano. True to his word, Wilkes was held in the town jail awaiting the circuit judge. The incident had turned public opinion firmly against him, with several other young women coming forward with stories of mistreatment at his hands. 2 days before the wedding, an unexpected visitor arrived at the Lazy Sea, a tall, uniformed man whose resemblance to Foster was unmistakable. "Samuel." Foster stared in disbelief at his younger brother. "What are you doing here?" Samuel Collins shifted uncomfortably. "Judge Parker wrote to me about your engagement, said it was high time I put aside our differences and came home." The brothers regarded each other warily until Hannah stepped forward. "I'm Hannah O'Sullivan. It's a pleasure to meet you, Samuel." Samuel tipped his hat. "Madam." "I hear my brother had the good sense to ask for your hand." "The best decision I ever made," Foster said, his eyes never leaving his brother's face. "Are you staying, if you'll have me?" Samuel's voice held a question, an olive branch extended after years of silence. Foster's expression softened. "This is your home too, Sam, always has been." That evening, over dinner, the brothers began the slow process of reconciliation. Samuel explained that he'd been too young and angry to understand Foster's decisions after their mother's death, too proud to admit he might have been wrong. "I've had 8 years in the Army to think about it," he said. "And I've come to realize you did the best you could, Foster. You kept the ranch, kept our family legacy alive. I was too blind to see it then." Foster nodded, emotion making his voice rough. "We both made mistakes. What matters is you're here now." Hannah watched the brothers with a full heart, seeing how much the reconciliation meant to Foster. Another piece of his life falling into place, another wound beginning to heal. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, a perfect December morning with frost sparkling on the grass and a sky so blue it hurt to look at it. The ranch was transformed, with evergreen boughs and red ribbons decorating the main house, and the barn cleared and prepared for the celebration afterward. Hannah dressed in her newly finished gown, a creation of ivory silk with lace at the collar and cuffs. Eliza arranged her hair, weaving in sprigs of winter berries and evergreen. "You look beautiful," Eliza said, stepping back to admire her work, like something from a fairy tale. "I feel like I'm living one," Hannah admitted. "6 months ago, I was alone and desperate. Now you're about to marry the best man in the territory," Eliza finished with a smile, "and gain a whole family in the process." The ceremony itself was simple but deeply moving. Foster waited beneath the arbor, Samuel standing proudly as his best man. Hannah walked from the house on Judge Parker's arm, her heart swelling at the sight of Foster's face when he saw her. Their vows were traditional, but spoken with such conviction that many guests dabbed at their eyes. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Foster's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise of the life they would build together. The celebration lasted well into the evening. There was music and dancing, a feast that rivaled their Thanksgiving dinner, and enough goodwill to warm the coldest heart. Even the ranch hands, who normally maintained a gruff exterior, were moved by the obvious love between the newlyweds. When the last guest had departed and the household settled for the night, Foster led Hannah to the master bedroom, now their shared sanctuary. "I have one more wedding gift," he said, retrieving a small box from his dresser. Inside lay a delicate gold locket. Foster opened it to reveal a tiny painting of the ranch house on one side. The other side was empty. "For our future," he explained. "Perhaps someday a miniature of our first child." Hannah's eyes filled with tears of joy. "I love you, Foster Collins, and I love you, Hannah Collins." He drew her into his arms. "From the moment I saw you, I knew my life would never be the same." Spring arrived at the lazy sea with a burst of new life. The pastures turned emerald green, calves wobbled beside their mothers, and wildflowers carpeted the hillsides. In the main house, another miracle was unfolding. Hannah was expecting their first child. "A September baby," Foster said with wonder, his hand gentle on Hannah's still flat stomach, "just in time for harvest." Hannah covered his hand with her own. "I never imagined I could be this happy." Foster pulled her close. "When I bid for you that day, I thought I was saving you. I never realized you would save me right back." "We saved each other," Hannah corrected softly, "and now we have the rest of our lives to be thankful for it." As the sun set over the Montana mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Foster and Hannah stood on the porch of their home, arms around each other, looking out over the land that had brought them together. From an auction block in a dusty town to a love that would last a lifetime, their journey had only just begun. 6 years later, the Lazy Sea Ranch had prospered beyond Foster's wildest dreams. The main house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family: 4-year-old Thomas, 2-year-old Elizabeth, and baby James, born just 3 months earlier. Samuel had settled permanently at the ranch, building his own cabin nearby and taking on more responsibility for the day-to-day operations. Eliza had stayed on as well, eventually marrying Henry, the foreman. They lived in a small house near the bunkhouse, where Eliza had started a school for the children of the ranch hands. On a warm September afternoon, the extended family gathered to celebrate Hannah and Foster's anniversary. Tables were set up in the shade of the old oak trees, laden with food prepared by Hannah and Eliza together. As Foster watched his wife laugh with their children, he marveled at how completely his life had changed. The lonely rancher was now surrounded by family, his days filled with purpose and joy. "Penny for your thoughts," Hannah said, coming to stand beside him. Foster smiled, drawing her into his embrace. "I was just thinking how lucky I am that I decided to go to town that day 6 years ago." "It wasn't luck," Hannah replied, reaching up to touch his face. "It was destiny." In the distance, The mountains stood sentinel over the valley, unchanged since long before the Collins family made their home there. But the land had witnessed their story from a desperate auction to a love that would echo through generations, a legacy of courage, second chances, and hearts that recognized each other even in the most unlikely circumstances. And as the sun set on another day at the lazy sea, Foster and Hannah Collins held each other close, grateful for the auction that had brought them together, the courage that had allowed them to find love, and the promise of many more years side by side.